The dust cloud rose on the horizon like a red specter, and Willa Peterson felt her heart seize in her chest when she realized those weren't wild mustangs thundering across the open plain, but 300 head of panicked longhorns charging straight toward where she stood frozen beside her overturned wagon. She had been traveling alone from Carson City to Virginia City, Nevada, in the scorching July of 1874, carrying her late father's surveying equipment and what little remained of her inheritance after the bank collapse had taken everything else. The wheel had cracked on a jagged stone barely an hour outside town, and now she stood in the worst possible place at the worst possible time, watching death stampede toward her on 10,000 hooves. Wade Dalton saw her from half a mile away, a small figure in a blue calico dress standing impossibly still, while the earth itself seemed to shake with the approaching cattle. He had been driving the herd north with 5 other cowboys when a rattlesnake, maybe, or a sudden gust carrying the scent of a mountain lion, had spooked the lead steers into a blind panic. His gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Ranger, responded to the pressure of his knees before Wade even consciously made the decision. They broke from the edge of the stampede and flew across the sun-baked earth, Wade leaning low over Ranger's neck, his heart pounding harder than it had in his 26 years of living. The woman finally moved, stumbling backward, but Wade could see she would never make it. The cattle were coming too fast, a churning wall of horn and hide that would trample anything in its path without even slowing. He urged Ranger faster, feeling the powerful muscles bunch and extend beneath him, eating up the ground in great leaping strides. The roar of the stampede filled his ears, drowning out everything else except the blood rushing through his veins and the singular thought that he had to reach her. Willa saw the rider coming from the corner of her eye, but she could not look away from the terrible sight bearing down on her. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and useless. She had survived so much in her 23 years: her mother's death when she was 12, her father's slow decline into grief and whiskey, the long months nursing him through consumption until he finally let go 3 months ago. She had thought herself strong, capable of making this journey alone, of starting fresh in Virginia City, where her father's old partner had promised her work keeping books for his mining operation. She had not imagined dying like this, crushed into the Nevada earth before she ever had the chance to live. Wade reached her with seconds to spare. He did not slow or hesitate, just swept down from the saddle with one arm extended. His hand closed around her waist, and he hauled her up with a strength born of years working cattle and breaking horses. She was lighter than he expected, and the momentum carried her up and across his lap as he straightened. Her shoulder collided with his chest hard enough to knock the wind from both of them, but he tightened his arm around her waist and wheeled Ranger sharply to the right. The lead steers thundered past so close that Wade felt the heat radiating from their bodies and smelled the rank fear sweat of them. A horn caught his stirrup, nearly tearing his boot free, but Ranger was already carrying them clear, racing parallel to the stampede now rather than toward it. Wade did not let himself think about what would have happened if they had been 1 second slower. He focused instead on keeping his seat, on the warm weight of the woman pressed against him, on guiding Ranger away from danger. They rode for what felt like miles, but was probably only a few hundred yards before Wade finally pulled Ranger to a halt on a small rise well clear of the stampede's path. The cattle thundered on, following the contours of the valley floor, and he could see his fellow cowboys riding hard to turn the leaders and slow the panic. It would take time, but they would manage it. They always did. The woman in his arms was shaking, and Wade suddenly became acutely aware of how tightly he held her, of the way her hair had come loose from its pins and now fell in dark waves against his shoulder. He loosened his grip immediately, gentling his voice the way he would with a spooked horse. "You are safe now," he said. "I have got you." Willa found she could not speak. Her hands were fisted in the front of his shirt. She did not remember grabbing it, and when she tried to release the fabric, her fingers would not cooperate. She drew in a shuddering breath that caught in her chest like a sob. "Easy," Wade murmured. "Just breathe. You are all right." She forced herself to meet his eyes and found herself staring into a face weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into bright horizons. His eyes were the color of creek water over stones, a clear gray-green that seemed to see straight through to her bones. He had several days' worth of beard darkening his jaw, and his dark blonde hair was shaggy beneath his hat, but there was a kindness in his expression that made something inside her chest loosen. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my life." "Could not very well let you get trampled," Wade said, and she heard the faint tremor beneath his casual tone that told her he had been more frightened than he wanted to admit. "What in God's name were you doing out here alone?" "My wagon," Willa said, and the words seemed to unlock something because suddenly she was talking too fast, the sentences tumbling over each other. "The wheel broke, and I was trying to see if I could fix it myself because I am traveling to Virginia City and I have my father's equipment, and I cannot afford to hire someone. And then I heard the noise, but I did not realize what it was until they were already so close and I could not move. I just froze." "Hey," Wade interrupted gently. "It is all right. You are safe." He hesitated, then added, "I am Wade Dalton. I work for the Double R Ranch. We were driving these cattle to the railhead when they spooked." "Willa Peterson," she said. Her heart was still racing, but the world had stopped tilting quite so wildly. "From Carson City." Or I was, anyway. Wade could feel her beginning to steady in his arms, though she still had not made any move to dismount. He found he did not particularly mind. It had been a long time since he had held a woman, and longer still since one had looked at him with anything other than calculation about what he might be able to provide. Willa Peterson's dark eyes held only honest gratitude and the lingering shadow of fear. "Your wagon," he said. "Where did you leave it?" She turned to look back the way they had come, and Wade followed her gaze. The stampede had veered north, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the still air. He could just make out the dark shape of an overturned wagon perhaps a quarter-mile distant. "We should check on it," Wade said. "Make sure the cattle did not destroy whatever you were carrying." "I cannot ask you to do that," Willa protested. "You need to help with your herd. The boys can manage," Wade assured her, "and I am not about to leave you stranded out here." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though you might want to get down now unless you plan on riding in my lap all the way to Virginia City." Willa felt heat flood her cheeks as she realized she was still pressed against his chest, still clutching his shirt. She released it quickly, smoothing the wrinkled fabric in a futile gesture. "I am sorry," she stammered. "I did not mean to. No need to apologize," Wade said. He swung his right leg over Ranger's neck and dropped to the ground in one smooth motion, then reached up to help her down. His hand spanned her waist easily, and he lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. Her feet touched the ground, but her knees immediately buckled. Wade caught her before she could fall, one arm around her shoulders and the other beneath her elbow. "Easy there. Your legs are just remembering they are supposed to work." Willa leaned into his support more heavily than pride wanted to allow, but she had little choice. Her entire body felt as though it were made of water. "I am not usually so helpless," she said, frustrated with herself. You just nearly got trampled by 300 head of cattle, Wade pointed out reasonably. I would be more concerned if you were not shaken up. He kept his arm around her shoulders as he guided her to a flat boulder. Sit here for a minute. Get your bearings. She sank onto the sun-warmed stone gratefully, and Wade crouched in front of her, studying her face with an intensity that made her self-conscious. She knew she must look a fright, covered in dust and with her hair in complete disarray. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked. "Did the cattle touch you?" "No," Willa said. "You reached me in time." She met his eyes again and felt that strange flutter in her chest. "Truly, I cannot thank you enough. If you had been even a moment slower, but I was not," Wade interrupted firmly. "So let us not dwell on what might have happened." He straightened and looked toward the wagon again. "Can you ride? We should retrieve whatever we can of your belongings before anyone else happens along." Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. Wade offered his hand and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. This time her legs held steady, though she still felt as fragile as spun glass. He led her to where Ranger stood patiently, the buckskin's head lowered and one ear swiveling toward them. "He is beautiful," Willa said softly, reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. "And patient," Wade added. "Which is good, because he is about to carry double again." He mounted first, then extended his hand down to her. "Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up." Willa had ridden horses before her father had kept a mare for getting around Carson City, but she had never mounted like this. She placed her worn boot on Wade's and grasped his forearm, and a moment later found herself settling onto the saddle behind him. There was no proper way to ride like this, so she wrapped her arms around his waist and tried not to think about how improper this entire situation was. Wade felt her hands locked together against his stomach and had to remind himself to breathe. She was a stranger, a woman he had known for all of 15 minutes, and he had no business noticing how she fit against him or the way her breath tickled the back of his neck through his shirt. He urged Ranger forward with a gentle pressure of his heels, keeping the pace to an easy walk. They rode in silence for a few minutes, and Wade found himself hyper-aware of every small movement she made, every shift of her weight behind him. Finally, to distract himself more than anything, he asked, "What kind of work are you planning to do in Virginia City?" "Bookkeeping," Willa answered. Her voice sounded steadier now, which he took as a good sign. "My father's old partner owns part of a silver mine there. He said they needed someone to manage the accounts, and I have always been good with numbers." "That is a useful skill," Wade acknowledged, "especially in a mining town. Money changes hands fast in Virginia City." "Have you been there long?" she asked. "About 4 years now," Wade said. "Came west from Missouri after the war ended. Worked a few different ranches before signing on with the Double R." He hesitated, then added, "It is a good town, mostly. Growing fast, which means it can be rough around the edges, but there are honest people there trying to build something real." Willa absorbed this, noting what he did not say as much as what he did. "You were in the war, tail end of it," Wade confirmed. "Was only 17 when I joined up. Saw enough to know I did not want to stay in Missouri after." He had never been one to talk much about those years, but something about the situation, maybe the fact that they were riding double in the middle of nowhere, or maybe just that she had shared her own story of loss without him even asking, made him continue. "Lost my father and older brother both. Mother could not bear to stay on the farm after, so she went to live with her sister in St. Louis. I headed west as soon as I was old enough to know which end of a horse was the front." "I am sorry," Willa said softly, and Wade heard genuine sympathy in her voice, not pity. There was a difference, and he appreciated it. "Was a long time ago," he said, which was true even if some wounds never entirely healed. "What about your father? You said you are carrying his surveying equipment." "He died 3 months ago," Willa said. Consumption. He had been sick for nearly a year, and toward the end. She trailed off, then seemed to gather herself. He was a good man. A dreamer, maybe too much of one. He always thought the next venture would be the one that paid off, that would let him give me the kind of life my mother had wanted for us. But it never quite worked out that way. Wade heard the love in her voice, and the grief, and the complicated tangle of emotions that came with losing someone you cared for deeply, even while wishing they had made different choices. Sounds like he did the best he knew how, he offered. He did, Willa agreed. And now I get to make my own choices, starting with not letting his surveying equipment go to waste. Mr. Hutchins, that is my father's partner, said the mining companies are always needing surveys done, and the tools are worth a fair amount if I cannot find someone to hire. They had reached the wagon while they talked, and Wade's assessment was not encouraging. The vehicle had not been trampled, thankfully, as it sat just outside the stampede's path, but the broken wheel was completely destroyed, and the wagon listed heavily to one side. He helped Willa down, then dismounted himself and went to investigate. The surveying equipment, packed carefully in a wooden crate, appeared intact. Willa's other belongings, clothing, a few books, cooking utensils, were scattered but mostly undamaged. Wade helped her gather everything into neat piles while he thought through their options. Wagon is not going anywhere without a new wheel, he finally said, stating the obvious. And even with one, the axle looks cracked. You would need a wheelwright to fix it properly. How much would that cost? Willa asked, though he could hear in her voice that she already knew the answer would be more than she could afford. More than it is worth, Wade said bluntly. This wagon has seen better days. He looked at the pile of belongings, mentally calculating. How much money do you have for supplies? Willa hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing finances with a stranger, but practicality won out. $12, she admitted. It has to last until Mr. Hutchins pays me. Wade did some quick arithmetic. $12 might cover a week's room and board at a cheap boarding house if she was very careful. It would not cover wagon repairs, not by half. Here is what we are going to do, he said, making the decision even as he spoke. I will take you into Virginia City with whatever you can carry on horseback. The rest we will have to leave or come back for later with a proper wagon. I cannot ask you to do that, Willa protested. You have your herd to worry about. The herd will be fine, Wade interrupted. The boys will get them settled, and I will catch up tomorrow. Besides, I was planning to head into town anyway for supplies. This was not entirely true, but it was close enough, and he could see she was gearing up to argue more. Willa looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded. All right, she said quietly, but only if you let me pay you for your trouble once I have money. We can discuss that later, Wade said, which was not agreement but also not refusal. He turned his attention to the pile of belongings. What absolutely has to come with you? They spent the next 20 minutes sorting and repacking. The surveying equipment was essential, so Wade secured the crate behind Ranger's saddle with rope from his saddlebags. Willa's clothing fit into a single carpet bag, along with her books, and a few personal items that Wade pretended not to notice her packing carefully: a tintype photograph, a woman's brooch, a packet of letters tied with ribbon. He helped her hide the remaining items under the overturned wagon, wedging them into the space beneath the bed where they would not be immediately visible to passers-by. Not a perfect solution, he admitted, but better than leaving everything in plain sight. The sun was well past its zenith by the time they finished, and Wade realized with a start that he had not eaten since dawn. His stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, and Willa looked up with a startled expression that transformed into an unexpected smile. "I have some cornbread," she offered, "and dried apples. It is not much, but you are welcome to share." They sat in the shade cast by the wagon and ate a simple meal that tasted better than it had any right to, probably because Wade was starving and the company was pleasant. Willa told him more about Carson City and her father's work, and Wade found himself talking more than he usually did, sharing stories about life on the ranch and some of the more memorable cattle drives he had been on. She laughed at his description of a particularly stubborn steer named Napoleon, who had made it his personal mission to cause chaos at every opportunity. And Wade discovered he liked the sound of her laughter, warm and genuine, and a little bit surprised, as though she had not expected to find anything funny today. "Do you ever miss Missouri?" she asked as they packed up the remains of their meal. Wade considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss what it was before the war," he said slowly, "but that place does not exist anymore. The Missouri I knew is gone, and the one that replaced it is not somewhere I want to be." He looked out at the vast Nevada landscape, all sage and sun-bleached earth and distant mountains. "This country is hard, but it is honest. It does not pretend to be something it is not." Willa nodded as though she understood. "My father used to say the West was where you went to become whoever you wanted to be, that the past did not matter as much as what you did next." "He was right about that," Wade said. He stood and offered her his hand. "Ready to find out who you are going to become in Virginia City?" She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, and this time when their eyes met, she did not look away. "Ready," she confirmed. They rode through the afternoon, following the wagon road that wound between low hills covered in scrub brush and the occasional twisted pine. Wade kept Ranger to a steady pace, mindful of the extra weight, and Willa gradually relaxed against his back. At one point he felt her startle and realized she had been dozing, her cheek pressed against his shoulder blade. "Sorry," she murmured, straightening. "I did not mean to fall asleep." "You have had an eventful day," Wade said mildly. "Feel free to rest if you need to. I will make sure you do not fall off." She did not doze again, but she also did not hold herself quite so stiffly, and Wade found himself thinking that this was perhaps the most pleasant ride he had taken in longer than he could remember. The sun painted the hills gold and amber as it began its descent toward the horizon, and he pointed out landmarks when they passed them, a distinctive rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the remains of an old stage stop that had been abandoned when the railroad came through. They crested a rise as the sun was setting, and Virginia City spread out before them in the valley below, a jumble of buildings clinging to the side of Mount Davidson like a particularly determined barnacle. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys, and even from this distance, Wade could hear the muted roar of stamp mills crushing ore. The town never really slept. The mines operated around the clock, and the businesses that served the miners followed suit. "It is bigger than I expected," Willa said, and Wade heard nervousness creeping back into her voice. "About 15,000 people last I heard," Wade said. "Maybe more. They stopped counting after a while." He felt her tense behind him and added, "But it is not as overwhelming as it looks. The main streets are well lit and the marshal keeps decent order." "Where were you planning to stay?" "Mr. Hutchins said there was a boarding house on B Street," Willa said. "Mrs. Chen's place. He said she was respectable and did not charge too much." Wade knew the place, a neat establishment run by a Chinese widow who had come to Nevada with her husband during the first silver strikes. Her husband had died in a mining accident 5 years back, and she had turned their home into a boarding house that catered to single women working in town. It was indeed respectable, and Mrs. Chen had a reputation for being both fair and protective of her boarders. Good choice, he said. I will take you there directly. They rode down into town as the gas lights were being lit along the main streets, and Willa stared at everything with wide eyes. Virginia City was a study in contrasts: fine brick buildings, standing next to ramshackle structures of raw pine, elegant women in silk dresses passing rough miners still covered in rock dust, the sound of piano music drifting from a dozen different saloons while church bells rang the evening hour. The streets were crowded even at this hour, with freight wagons hauling supplies and ore wagons heading to the mills and people on foot navigating between them all. Wade guided Ranger through the chaos with the ease of long practice, calling out greetings to people he knew and ignoring the curious looks directed at him and his passenger. He knew how they must appear: Willa dusty and disheveled, riding behind him with her arms around his waist, and he knew tongues would wag. But gossip was cheap in a mining town, and he figured she would establish her own reputation soon enough. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a two-story structure painted white with green shutters, standing out among its neighbors through sheer force of tidiness. Wade dismounted and helped Willa down, then untied the carpetbag and surveying crate while she stood looking at the building with an expression he could not quite read. "This is it," he said unnecessarily. "Mrs. Chen runs a good establishment. You should be comfortable here." Willa turned to face him, and in the light spilling from the boarding house windows, he could see the exhaustion written in every line of her face, and something else too: a vulnerability she had not shown during their long ride. "Wade," she said softly, "I do not know how to thank you properly. What you did today, saving my life and then bringing me all this way when you had no obligation to do so, I could not have done anything else," Wade interrupted, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Any decent person would have helped." "But it was not any decent person," Willa said. "It was you." She reached out and touched his arm lightly. "Thank you for everything." Wade found himself looking into her dark eyes again and feeling that strange tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the long ride. "You are welcome," he managed. They stood there for a moment that stretched too long, until the front door of the boarding house opened and a small, neat woman with iron-gray hair appeared, looking at them with sharp curiosity. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Chen asked, her English precise and barely accented. "Mrs. Chen," Willa said, stepping forward. "My name is Willa Peterson. Thomas Hutchins arranged a room for me." Recognition lit the older woman's face. "Ah, yes, Mr. Hutchins spoke of you. I have been expecting you, though not quite so late." Her gaze shifted to Wade, assessing. "Mr. Dalton, I see you have been playing rescue." "Something like that," Wade agreed. He did not ask how Mrs. Chen knew his name. She made it her business to know everyone in Virginia City. He handed Willa her carpetbag, then hesitated over the surveying crate. "This is heavy. Where do you want it?" "I can show you to the room," Mrs. Chen offered. "Come in, both of you. You look like you could use some tea and a good meal, Miss Peterson." Wade followed them inside, carrying the crate through a neat parlor and up a narrow staircase to the second floor. Mrs. Chen led them to a room at the back of the house, small but clean, with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the hills behind town. $12 a week includes 2 meals, Mrs. Chen said briskly. "Breakfast at 7, supper at 6. No men above the first floor, no drinking, no entertaining questionable company. Church on Sunday is not required but strongly encouraged. Wash day is Monday. Any questions?" "No, madam," Willa said faintly. "This is perfect." Wade set the surveying crate in the corner and turned to find both women looking at him. "I should go," he said. "Need to find the boys and see how the herd fared." "Of course," Willa said. She followed him back down the stairs, with Mrs. Chen trailing behind at a discreet distance. At the door, Willa caught his sleeve. "Will I see you again?" she asked, then seemed embarrassed by her own boldness. "I mean, I still need to settle up with you for your help, and I need to retrieve the rest of my things from the wagon. I will come by in a few days," Wade promised. "After you have settled in and I have finished with the cattle drive, we can figure out the wagon situation then." He settled his hat more firmly on his head and looked down at her. "Take care of yourself, Willa Peterson. You too, Wade Dalton," she said softly. He left before he could do something foolish like ask to see her tomorrow, or tell her that he could not remember the last time he had enjoyed someone's company quite so much. Outside, Ranger waited patiently, and Wade mounted with a weariness that went bone deep. It had been a long day, but as he rode through Virginia City's crowded streets toward the livery stable where the Double R kept horses in town, he found his mind kept drifting back to dark eyes and the weight of a woman's arms around his waist. Willa stood at the window of her room long after Wade had disappeared into the evening crowds, watching the lights of Virginia City twinkle in the darkness. Her entire body ached with exhaustion, but her mind would not settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that wall of cattle bearing down on her, felt the ground shake beneath her feet. And then she felt strong arms lifting her to safety, the solid warmth of Wade's chest against her shoulder, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek during that long ride. She barely knew him. They had spent perhaps 6 hours together, most of that time traveling in relative silence, and yet she could not shake the feeling that something significant had happened today, something beyond the obvious fact that he had saved her life. There had been a moment, standing outside the boarding house, when she had looked into his gray-green eyes and felt a connection she could not name, a sense of recognition that had nothing to do with familiarity and everything to do with possibility. "You are being ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "The man saved your life. Of course you feel grateful and drawn to him. That is just natural." But it had not felt like gratitude, not entirely. It had felt like something else, something she was afraid to name because naming it would make it real, and real things could hurt you. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and Mrs. Chen entered carrying a tray laden with tea and what looked like half a chicken, rice, and vegetables. "Eat," the older woman commanded, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "You look like you have not had a proper meal in days." "I have not had much appetite lately," Willa admitted, though the smell of the food made her stomach wake up and take notice. "But this looks wonderful." "Thank you." Mrs. Chen settled into the room's single chair while Willa sat on the edge of the bed and began to eat. The chicken was perfectly seasoned, the rice fluffy, and Willa had to force herself to eat slowly rather than wolfing it down. "So," Mrs. Chen said after a few minutes. "You had an eventful journey, yes." Willa nearly choked on her tea. "Is it that obvious? You arrive after dark, covered in dust, riding with Wade Dalton of all people and carrying surveying equipment. This tells a story." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "Are you all right, child? You look like you have seen something frightening." So Willa told her, the words coming more easily than she expected. She described the broken wagon wheel, the approaching stampede, Wade's rescue. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her dark eyes sharp and missing nothing. "You were very fortunate," she said when Willa finished. "Wade Dalton is a good man. There are not so many of those in Virginia City as I would like." "You know him well?" Willa asked, trying to sound casual. "Well enough. He comes into town once a month or so, always pays his bills, does not drink too much or gamble more than he can afford. Polite to women, firm with men who need firmness. He helped me once when some minors decided they did not want to pay their boarding fees. stood in my parlor with his arms crossed and suggested very calmly that they reconsider. They reconsidered. Mrs. Chen smiled at the memory. He has a reputation for being reliable, fair. Those are valuable qualities out here. Willa absorbed this, filing away each detail like pieces of a puzzle she was trying to assemble. Is he married? The question was out before she could stop it, and she felt her cheeks heat. I just want to know that is. I need to pay him back for his help, and I should probably speak with his wife if he has one. He is not married, Mrs. Chen said, a knowing glint in her eye that made Willa want to sink through the floor. Not courting anyone either, as far as I know. Keeps to himself mostly, though half the single women in town have tried to catch his attention at one time or another. He is handsome and capable and kind, which makes him quite a prize in a place like this. I was not asking because I have any romantic interest, Willa said quickly. I just met him today. That would be absurd. Of course, Mrs. Chen agreed, but her tone suggested she did not believe a word of it. She stood and collected the empty dishes. Get some rest, Miss Peterson. Tomorrow you start your new life in Virginia City, and you will need your strength. The work Mr. Hutchins has for you is not easy. Mining accounts are complicated, and there are always men trying to cheat the system. You will need your wits about you. After Mrs. Chen left, Willa changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind kept replaying the day's events, and every time she tried to push thoughts of Wade aside, they crept back in. The way he had looked at her when he helped her down from his horse. The care he had taken in securing her belongings. The easy way he had talked to her, not condescending or overly forward, just honest conversation between two people sharing a long journey. Stop it, she whispered to herself in the darkness. You came here to build a new life, not to moon over the first man who was kind to you. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was of gray-green eyes and strong arms, and the way her heart had skipped when Wade promised he would come see her again in a few days. Wade found his crew at the stockyards on the edge of town, with the herd finally settled and the men bedding down for the night. His segundo, a weathered cowboy named Jim Reeves, looked up from the fire as Wade approached. There you are, Jim said, relief evident in his voice. We were starting to worry. That stampede was a bad one. Everyone make it through all right? Wade asked, accepting the tin cup of coffee someone thrust into his hands. Not a man hurt, and we only lost 2 head that we know of, Jim reported. Could have been a lot worse. What happened to you? Last I saw, you were riding hell bent after something. Wade settled onto a log near the fire and told them about Willa and the rescue. The men listened with varying expressions: concern, approval, and in the case of young Tommy Fletcher, barely concealed amusement. So you played hero, Tommy said with a grin. Is she pretty, this woman you saved? She is a lady who nearly got trampled, Wade said repressively. And yes, I played hero because what else was I supposed to do? Let her die? Of course not, Jim said, shooting Tommy a quelling look. You did the right thing, Wade. Is she settled now? At Mrs. Chen's boarding house, Wade confirmed. She is here to work for Thomas Hutchins, doing bookkeeping for his mining operation. Jim whistled low. Hutchins, that is good work if she can handle it. He runs a tight ship, but he is fair. He studied Wade's face in the firelight. You planning to see her again? Need to help her retrieve the rest of her belongings, Wade said, focusing very intently on his coffee. Her wagon broke down a few miles out of town. We had to leave some things behind. Uh-huh, Jim said, and Wade could hear the smile in his voice even without looking up. Well, let me know when you want to go back for her things. I will spare a wagon and a man or two to help. They talked for a while longer about practical matters when the herd would be ready to move to the railhead. who would stay in town to guard the cattle, who would ride back to the ranch for more supplies. Eventually, the men began settling into their bedrolls, and Wade followed suit, but like Willa miles away in her boarding house room, he found sleep elusive. He kept seeing her face in those frozen moments before he reached her, pale with terror but not panicked, as though some part of her had already accepted what was about to happen. And then the way she had looked at him after, like he had done something extraordinary when really he had only done what any decent person would do. Except he knew that was not entirely true. There were plenty of men who would have written off one woman as an acceptable loss,